And I will start the webinar so that participants can start to join.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's a beautiful day here in the Washington, D.C. area where the cherry blossoms are fully blooming, and I hope you're having a good day where you are. My name is Kim Betcher. I am your moderator. For those who may not be familiar with the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE for short, we're a nonprofit working around the globe to improve the business environment and engage the private sector in democratic development. Informality has been of great interest to CIPE ever since our founding. In fact, in 1984, our first program partner was Hernando de Soto, and CIPE was an early supporter of his advocacy in Peru. Since then, of course, we have dealt with the subject in many ways, in many places, including, for example, Guatemala, Albania, Egypt, Tunisia, Kenya, and so on. I'm delighted to have three fantastic speakers with us today. This is an event of the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network. FEDN is an invitation-only network of accomplished individuals who have been champions of the principles of democracy and free enterprise and have been successful in the area of policy reform from different sectors. To learn a little bit more about the Free Enterprise and Democracy Network, take a look at the new website, FEDN.CIPE.org. What we'll have today is a few rounds of questions that I will lead with our panelists, and then we'll open up for the audience using the Q&A function in Zoom. And if you would like to ask a question, it's never too soon to pose one. We're talking about economic informality, which is essentially business that is off the books. It is not recorded, it is not registered, it's businesses that don't have a tax identification or are not in compliance with regulations. So for a variety of reasons, this is economic activity that is unofficial, unrecorded. But these are businesses that are producing what would otherwise be considered legitimate goods and services. It's a large phenomenon and it has many aspects to it. It looks different in different places. For some, it's the traditional sector. For others, it's business that's trying to evade and get around the formal legal system. Also, I want to stress is it's not purely a micro enterprise phenomenon, but there are firms of varying sizes and even firms that are partly formal and partly working informally. We're at a moment now where I think it's really important to talk about informality. Obviously, we've had the pandemic, we've had shutdowns, and the effect on the informal sector has been tremendous, partly because of the policies, the shutting down of markets, sometimes in a punitive fashion. Many of these businesses are small. It's harder for them to adjust and adapt. They're unable to tap into sort of formal relief programs often. Their workers don't receive any protections, and the sector is swelling as unemployment rises in the formal sector. The situation does look different from place to place, but it's a serious situation. Now, in this crisis, what kind of responses will we see in terms of assistance of reform? There's a long history of working on this issue. Anybody who follows it will know, I mean, there have been many efforts to promote enforcement, to promote registration, to simplify tax systems, to educate people and businesses. All kinds of things have been tried. There have been success areas and incremental progress, but informality has not gone away, and sometimes the way we treat it doesn't seem to change or evolve. So the question is, will there be anything new this time as we're coming out of crisis? Is this an opportunity, right? Does the crisis shake things up, break down some systems in a positive way? Does it draw attention to the disparities and motivate us to do something? And hopefully we can talk about some, innovative ways to deal with this? Are there digital technologies, different value chains, ecosystems approaches, collective action? What can we do that's a bit new and different in this space? So we want to educate everyone a little bit about what's going on, but also spread some new thinking. I will now introduce our speakers. First, we have Marina Stadthagen, who had a long career in foreign service and then has worked as a consultant for a variety of organizations, including COSEP, the peak business organization in Nicaragua. She's worked for the International Labor Organization. I'm particularly excited about her work as the executive director of Red de Empresarias de Nicaragua, so the Women Entrepreneurs Network in Nicaragua. She's been very dynamic there and, among other things, been leading a women's business agenda. She has a master's degree from Columbia University. Next, I will introduce Slim Othmani. He's chairman of the board of directors of NCA Ruriba. He is the president of the Maghreb Economic Forum. And he has been awarded the title of Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur by the French government for his work to improve the business environment in Algeria. I know Slim largely for his work on corporate governance. He's also been a leader in thinking about informality in North Africa, and he is the founder of a leading Algerian think tank, Circle of Action and Reflection on Enterprise, or CARE. And I'm happy to introduce Todor Yalamov, who very graciously joined the program at relatively short notice, but he is well known to CIPE and a longtime friend of CIPE. He is a non-resident fellow at the Center for Study of Democracy and a professor at Sofia University. He was a visiting scholar at CIPE for a year, 6 or 7 years ago. He has written on a whole lot of topics from corruption to informality, but also does interesting work in the area of information technology and innovation. I know he's done some things with robots. He was a leader of a business incubator and technology park network. So maybe he'll have some out-of-the-box ideas for us today. All right, well, I'd like to start with talking about the crisis, the economic crisis that was brought on by the pandemic, and how does that look in from where you sit in each of your countries. I think I might start with Slim Othmani. How bad are the effects with respect to informality from the pandemic, and what kind of responses are you seeing in terms of coping?
Thank you, Kim, and thanks everyone to attending this conference. In Algeria, it's now more than 15 years, close to 20 years, that we are trying to work to address the issue of informality, especially in Algeria, focusing at our think tank CARE level. And here we are, let's say we are hurt by two crises. The first crisis is the oil and gas price crisis, and this crisis witnessed the arrival of the COVID crisis. The first crisis impacted the purchasing power income of the population because the government started having this economical crisis to address. And informality benefit from that because they supply goods at lower price than the formal economy, and also because people don't want to pay taxes. And I used to say, it's an image, I don't have the right figures that sustain that my words. The informality during the last 4 or 5 years grew faster than the economy itself. So just because of the oil and gas prices. But COVID have hurt informality in a different way. Why? Not only because of confinement and because people don't go out, because everything's closed. No, informality can deal with that. But because COVID touched the talon d'Achille, you understand the word, and the weakest point of the informality is the logistic that bring the goods that they are using in the informal sector, especially for a country that imports more than 80% of what we consume. So if you have the airline company that are stopped, if you have the shipping company that are stopped, if you have the logistic in overall that was totally reduced, informality have less product to deal with or to sell or to propose to consumer. This is the bad side, and for the informal sector. And probably in the informal sector, we don't have also figures for that. We only know that informality represents more or less 50 to 60% of our economy, but probably they witnessed a lot of layoff, and we can notice that again in a decrease in purchasing power in the country for the formal businesses. In the FMCG product, we reached a decrease in up to 25% of the consumption, not only because of COVID, but because the people that has the money, half of them couldn't afford buying goods in the country. This is the first effect that we can clearly see on informality. I'm not talking about who's going to be hurt in terms of jobs. We don't have a clear analysis. Is it women? Is it kids? We are supposed not to have kids that are working in the informal sector in Algeria. Probably there's few of them. Women, yes, a lot. For sure. And are they hurt? Yes, for sure. Also, again, through the consumption, we can see that informality was hurt like any other part of the economy.
Thank you for that, Slim. Marina, how is the situation in Central America? Marina, can you take your mute off? And
sorry, I can talk about Nicaragua, but I can imagine that there are the same, a very similar situation in the rest of the Central American countries. But Nicaragua, even before the pandemic, have a very large informal economy. And this has increased greatly since April 18 with the civic uprising. We started a recession that has lasted 3 years and has grown. Our growth has gone down. So what we know about a lot of people being out of the formal labor market are going into informality, and that you don't need even a survey. You can see it out in the streets. How many street vendors have grown, and a lot of those people that were out of the formal labor market were women, because the sectors that have been hit the hardest since April 18 and through the pandemic have been sectors where women have been in largest numbers. So those are the ones that are we believe going into the informal sector a lot more. We are worried that the more informals there are, they're going to be competing among themselves. So there's going to be a sort of a war among them, because there are going to be have a smaller share of the market. So even if they were producing some profits, they're going to be reduced, but that large competitiveness that they're facing now with more and more informal businesses in there. And who are losing too, the formal businesses who are competing with informal businesses, you know. So it is also causing stress on the especially on the micro and small businesses that are competing with this informal. And another thing that we have noticed is that some micro and small businesses have gone from formality to informality because they can't afford all the payments for Social Security and taxes. So that's what we're seeing right now.
How are the members of your network coping, and are you seeing any difference between what the formal enterprises and maybe the informals are doing to cope?
Well, with the surveys we have done, we know they reduce hours, they reduce personnel, they reduce their lines. We know that, for example, in some sectors, in order to not to impact prices, they have been reducing the size of products or the quality of products. So that's some of the ways to cope with the crisis. And this happened in April 18, and now we even recommended that if they had no business, they couldn't work, they could close using a regulation. It was lawful. They could close their businesses for a time. So many of them did that. They used this special figure of temporary closure in order to avoid paying taxes. Most of them went back. You know, it was a temporary measure. They used it in April, and they used it again during the pandemic at the beginning, because of they asked for some formats we made for them to apply for that norm, that legal status. So, but they're coping in different ways and adapting to a shrinking market, because the less work there is, and the more recession, well, they have to cope with reduced markets, especially micro and small. It's harder for them to adapt. Then there's the problem also of credit. When we asked them about 5 or 6 months ago in a survey, a lot of them could not pay their credits, and that's a big issue for formal ones. And there have been no relief measures from the government. The only one I can think of is a normative to ease the negotiations for credits. But as far as I know, it was not that helpful yet. So we haven't had that much support from the government issue reliefs, like not paying the taxes for 3 months or no evasion, whatever. We haven't seen any of that.
I see. Turning to Europe, Todor, what can you tell us?
The crisis had quite diverse effects, both on sector level and national level, because the crisis and the government response kind of hit the countries differently. One particular example that I fancy is the structural transformation of informal economy in particular sectors, for instance, in restaurants. So in many countries, restaurants have been limited in terms of operation, either completely closed down or kind of offered only the takeaway delivery or delivery at home and so on. So what happened is that a lot of informal, restaurants that were operating primarily in informal economy lost completely. I mean, they had to close down. The demand was kind of shifted. So if you look at the official statistics of the turnover of restaurants, it was only 20% decrease in the first wave from March to August. That's a clear sign that there was a shift from the consumption in informal economy to the formal economy, because those that are delivering home have primarily paying over internet, so they declare everything. So in particular areas, companies actually benefited from the crisis. We did a survey how companies responded to the crisis and compared that with the global financial crisis 10 years ago. And it turned out that Bulgarian companies actually responded as the books say that companies should respond by, innovating. So a lot of companies have developed their online strategies. They did marketing strategies, but also they were involved in product innovation, and in some cases even they had higher exports because of the higher demands in particular goods. So the crisis is not always bad. And it's interesting to see how governments respond to that. I will talk more about how the government kind of tries to cope with the informality in retail on internet, but in a way, luckily, the planned measures to automatic registration of individual sales actually prevented from increase of informal economy during 2020. But again, in different countries, we see the crisis impact very differently, because in certain European countries, especially say Sweden, we don't see such drastic measures and as in Belgium or in Bulgaria. But everywhere you see rise of unemployment and of course increase of informal economy.
Well, let's continue from there, since you mentioned government policy, Todor. What has been the longer trend in policy over time? Is government behavior changing? Are changes happening that you want to see happen, or do you see more of the same? Are there lessons that need to be heard?
I would say I would love to see more, but there are certain actions that are in the right direction. For instance, in the last 5-6 years, there was a huge increase of informal enterprises that are trading over internet with goods that are bought somehow individually. They even kind of omit paying taxes from import from China because you order on your name. It's under the radar, and then you sell a lot of, say, small quantities. And the government decided to cooperate with the delivery companies. So at the end, all the individual sales that were received through the payment operators that are also delivery operators are received in the National Revenue Agency, and they're recorded automatically in your tax declaration. And the reason that the government did that was because the legitimate businesses were complaining that those illegal trades, especially with mobile phones and electronics, that you can save probably 30, 40, 50% of the price by not paying import duties and taxes and so on and so forth. And this kind of hits the legitimate business. So the government decided to automate the collection of information from the courier services that deliver that. So because say 80% or 90% of those informal businesses would not have virtual point of sale, but will get cash on delivery, and they'll get this cash from the courier service. So the government simply asked the courier, not just asking, but kind of having a law on that and so on. And they have individual data, and you have this declaration, even if you have sold your own mobile, but you can delete if it's for personal use. So it's your discretion to say if it's personal or business. But if you're doing that for business, you will not risk to declare it personal use. So this is how the technology and large-scale use of that technology can limit the informal economy. At the same time, we've been discussing at the Center for the Study of Democracy with the National Revenue Agency about not overperforming and not overreacting on informal economy, because studies have shown that sometimes you start informal because you want to just test your hypothesis, test your business model, and then formalize, legalize your business and so on and so forth. And even there's an academic study showing that those who have started in informal economy and later legalized are more productive than the completely formal economy from the very start. So the National Revenue Agency is carefully monitoring different segments, so not to kill, in a way, a potential business at a very early stage, because it will be too costly to comply with all the regulations.
That's a good lesson, not to overreact. We don't want to stamp out entrepreneurship. Slim, I think you've been calling for some attention to informality for a long time. How has that gone for you?
Yeah, yes, paying attention what is happening during the last years, and that's why I'm happy about what is happening. I know it's sad for everyone. Having the world is living a real mess, but at least people started paying attention to informality. I see personally 8 reasons to informality, and through those 8 reasons, probably we can address in a proper way informality instead of trying to be repressive and things like that. The first one is political. I'll tell you the 8th one, and then we can go through in a few seconds for each one. A political reason. Political reason, because sometimes the governments are illegitimate and the population didn't trust the system, the government, and whatsoever. The absence of democracy, no accountability and transparency of the institution, and nepotism. This make people go out of this of the system. The second one is economical, because there's crony access to finance, low wages, a non-diversified economy. So this lead to people to go informal. A fiscal reason, unfair or incoherent fiscal system with high income tax rates. This push people and companies and to go for informal. A social, high unemployment rate, high social taxes rate, gender and kids at work. This also is a reason, a strong reason to informality. A demographic, fast-growing population comparing to the capability of the government to create jobs, or the business environment to create the right jobs to absorb the level of people joining the business the business environment. Educational, unskilled workers versus business environment needs. So this push those people to informality. No one wants to hire them. Religious region. In our country, many consider that paying taxes and using credits are forbidden by the religion. And the eighth one was a surprise probably for all of you, is we call it here the hidden hand. The hidden hand is some countries or some people in specific sectors for specific purpose foster informal business just to destroy that part of the economy, or to interfere with political decision, and to create a sort of unrest in the country. And those people probably foster the informality. And hopefully unfortunately now for us, is that governments now use informality as a pretext to the failure that pop up because of the COVID crisis, and also in our country because of the economic crisis. And we started witnessing everywhere in the world, in the media, a lot of people started talking about informality, newspaper, television, radio, even in Europe. I haven't heard before the word of informality in Europe. All of a sudden, Europeans start talking about informality. So in North Africa, every day in radio. And the government, instead of blaming the fact that they have to address the eight reasons that I have presented, they start saying, "Oh no, we have a problem in our economy because of informality. Yes, we have COVID, but if informality was formal, then the effect of COVID was totally reduced," which from my point of view is totally wrong. So I think we have to look at informality from a different perspective. And I agree with Mr. Todor about the fact that I think the time of repressing informality is over. Government doesn't have, they don't have, sorry, the expertise. They don't have the know-how. They don't have the solution to create all the jobs needed by the population. Informality is acting like a valve to reduce the pressure on the society in overall. So I'm a fan of informality because informality shows the entrepreneurship spirit. Informality is very flexible. They adapt, they catch opportunity very fast. They have their own financial system. So there is a lot of pros about informality. Yes, there is cons. The fact that there is no social protection. But why we don't give social protection to informal sector? It's very strange. Why in many countries that we didn't allow to someone who hasn't an official job, he's working in the informal sector, why he's not allowed to go and pay whatever has to be paid to be socially protected? I don't know. In some countries, they started doing it. In other, no. During this this COVID crisis, here in Algeria, informal sector was totally abandoned. In Morocco, they decided to give them a small monthly wage, just its survival wage. So the informal sector has to be considered as probably uh, the tank of very creative entrepreneurs. And we should go and see what they are doing and probably help the most successful one to be formal and or communicate with them. We should help them to organize themselves like in association to make proposal to improve their standard of living in a very consequent way. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Slim. And before I turn to Marina, I see a couple of questions are coming in through the Q&A, very encouraging. And Marina, how do you interpret the learning from the past, how to deal with informality? Is there any promising new direction?
I think we have to be much more creative the way we had treated it. Like the previous speaker was saying, in the context of the pandemic, it has been a salvation for people who lost their jobs to go into the informality. So it's not all bad, and I don't think it is that easy to incorporate to the formal sector everybody, and not everybody will be able to be incorporated. So in time of crisis, they should have received some support, and they have not even the formal, but the informal sector has not received any support. Like in some countries, they have. So I think we have to look at informality with a different. With different eyes, with the service they also provide to society, and the goods they provide are needed. Informality, the production of services and goods would not exist if they weren't demanded and needed by the population. So we have to think about them as a part of the economy, and see how we can help them become better. Perhaps not moving to the all of them into the formal economy, as the previous speaker said, but some of them who can be more successful move into formality. But it is scary for entrepreneurs, and that we have seen at REM. That is really scary if you tell a new entrepreneur, okay, you have to pay so much taxes and so much social security for you. It is really scary for them, and it is. I don't think it's a wise. In fact, REM worked with a congresswoman to propose a law that was for first employment and first entrepreneurship, that gave a tax break for the first year for new entrepreneurs. I think that is something that can be a really good incentive for new entrepreneurs that are coming into the economy and who want to become formal in the long run.
Right. So let's talk about the formal entrepreneurship and the environment for that. Is that a good direction to encourage more formality, to support the formal entrepreneurship? And have you done anything in your policy work that looks at that?
We have tried. One of the things we have done, we don't do it that much anymore because we know it's really hard for some of them, is we guided women into becoming formal. We accept members that are informal businesses, not only formal. And we changed policy. We started as an association of only formal businesses, and we changed. And we are receiving a lot of new members who are from the informal sector, because like I say, many women lost their jobs and they're becoming entrepreneurs to sustain their families. So, but they don't want to start as a formal business. They are afraid, they don't know if the business model is going to work. So they start at the informal. So we do provide a lot of information. I think the lack of information on how to register, on the different ways you can register the business. We have two different tax systems, the simplified one and the regular one. For entrepreneurs, it is much better to start with the simplified system, but it is very hard to find information. We guided, we have somebody, for example, that is sort of a coach for formalizing business. And she even tells them to go to a certain office because they provide better service. But there is a lot of lack of information on how to become formal and the different options you have to become formal. So lack of information, I think, is key, and is something that hasn't been done with the seriousness it should be done.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pull up a couple of questions from the Q&A now. I'll just put two of them out there and see how the panelists would like to respond. Question from Brunilda Costa saying that high taxes may not be the reason pushing businesses to operate informally, and we have to look at the public services that come back or do not come back, and how that might be a factor. So I think that is interesting. And we had another question about relating to Slim's idea on how governments can actually provide social protection to the informal sector. So thoughts on taxes, on government services, or social protection. So who would like to respond from the panel?
I think I responded by writing to the panelists, to the attendee who put the question. In fact, the question on how the government could help informality to help protection for informality. As I said, if you allow people to pay a certain amount, you fix the amount, you can. It's just an idea. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it's the right answer, but I'm saying that some people already started that process in allowing people that are in the informal sector to go and pay for a minimum contribution to be protected socially, and also probably they can pay a sort of also minimum to have this not only health care protection, but at least to have also the unemployment protection for a certain period of time. During, as I said, Egypt and Morocco have shown a protection to the people that are working in the informal sector. The only challenge that the government have is to identify the people who work in the informal sector, which this is another story of informality. Do people accept to be identified as working in the informal sector, yes or no? Is it something that will follow them during their entire life in their CVs? I have a bachelor in informality, working in the market of X and Y location. So I don't think that this will help, but it's a big challenge, and it's very expensive to go in the street and identify all the people that work. That's why we should incentivize them not to formalize themselves, but we should incentivize them to protect themselves against for their health and also for the jobs, because their jobs has in backside families, probably kids that go to school, kids to feed, family to feed. So we need to pay attention to those people. We don't have, it's totally unacceptable to ignore them or to say that we must cut informality. Okay, let's cut informality. Are you going to give them jobs? Are you going to feed their family? Are you going to take care of their health? It's totally crazy. And we started listening, witnessing people or hearing people saying loudly that, not only in our country, in the region, but everywhere in the world. They think that we just have to say we should stop informalities and the police officers and the army, and the informality will stop. No. And I think also that political system, it's at their advantage that they are losing taxes, and so they will do less for the population and for the society, because they have less money to do. But in the other hand, they have a huge, a critical mass of population they can control, because they can show them that they allow them to be informal. So there's a political game that we have to be also very cautious about that, and we have to look at it closely. Because this is a door to manipulation of the population, etc. There's many stories around the political issue. My first reason of the 8th reason that I mentioned.
Yeah, I would also agree with the second part of the question, that what you get back from the taxes you pay is much more important than the actual tax rates. And this is confirmed by a lot of studies in different countries, independently on the actual tax rates. However, in Bulgarian case, we saw a huge increase in taxes and the readiness of businesses and people to pay their taxes when the taxes are lower than what I read from Slim. About 75%. It's ridiculous tax rate, and I can imagine why you have high informality with this tax rate. But I want to relate with another question: how you kind of stimulate the formalization of business and inclusion of people that are in informal economy. Not by their own decision. I mean, like, if you're an entrepreneur and you take the risk to be informal, it's one thing. But if you're an employee and you agree to work informally because that's what your employer proposes, the story is different. So what happened in Bulgaria is that the measures that targeted the firms were combined in a way with measures that were targeting employees. For instance, when people realized that they cannot get a mortgage loan to buy an apartment if they are working informally, or if they're on a minimum wage, and they're actually paying more in terms of paying rent instead of buying an apartment with a loan and paying the interest rate and paying for the social security and other taxes that they're saving, the net effect in going formal is actually positive for employees. And a lot of people started to ask their employers to be socially secured on the real wage. So this is one way that you can kind of stimulate. It's not just by more checks and penalties, but also by making it economically desirable to be in the social system. The same happened, by the way, with the COVID, because a lot of people realized that they would get social benefits on the formal salary, not on the informal. And also the same applies for the health benefits and so on and so forth. So I'm strongly arguing that tackling in informality should be an economic decision by all people involved. I mean, it should be valuable to you, both in terms of what you expect to get from the government in terms of service, but also the net effects from getting mortgages from the banks and so on and so forth.
Well, I'd like to invite, Marina, did you have a comment on this?
Yes. No, I was just going to say that the image of the government, the perception of people, or if the government is corrupt, illegitimate, not transparent, has to do a lot with the way that people feel about paying taxes. So that has to be taken into account. The less legitimate a government is perceived by the population, the less willingness of becoming formal or partially formal. So that is something that has to do with democracy. You know? So you will see that I'm sure that in the less democratic the governments are, the less the greater informality you will find.
For a final round from the panelists, and you can use this round for any comment you would like to make.
Yeah. So,
well, let's go to the final round, and we'll let Slim start. Okay.
no. It's a short word. I have
okay.
I have a problem with the word inclusion and the word informality, because every time we hear about informality, people say start talking about inclusion. Inclusion is something. Informality is another story, because you can include people that are in informality without having them being formal, which is totally different. You don't need to be formal to be included in the economy. Like, let's choose the example of the Chinese. They decided that milk producer, farmers that produce milk, they sell informally their milk to the milk industry. Okay, they are included in the economy, but they are not formal. So inclusion is something, and from informality to formality is another thing. I'm not a supporter of a society that has totally 100% of the people that are formal, but this is a fairy tale. That's the right word in English, I think. It's un conte de fées in French. It means that which society has 100% of people formal? None of them. Even if you go to the north of Europe, Sweden and countries that are seen like totally transparent and the corporate governance perfect and whatsoever, they are not 100% formal. They have informality. So inclusion is something that we have to consider for the informal sector, but including the informal sector in the economy, it doesn't mean that we're going to make the informal sector formal. It's a mistake that we are making. I've made also that mistake. And when I thought of it, I said, oh my God, the solution is to help informal people that are working in the informal sector. We need to help them be part of our economy, contribute to social security, to etc. But doesn't mean that I don't need to have their business formal. I need them to contribute. I need them to be part of the game. And then one day they will decide to be formal. It's okay. It's their problem. It's not my problem. My problem is to have the wealth that they are creating to be shared with the society, like everyone is sharing it. But doesn't mean that it has to be shared with the politician that no one trusts now everywhere in the world.
All right. Now for our final round from our expert speakers, it seems to me, and you know, please offer any final comment you wish. It seems to me that there is no single solution to informality, depending on which aspects of the problem you're looking at and which country you're looking at. So my final question is around who should be leading solutions, right? There are things government can do. Are there entrepreneurial responses? Do we need collective dialogue, collective action, new kinds of relationships between formal, informal, what have you? Who can be leading? Do you have a final recommendation for our listeners today? Marina, would you like to begin this time?
Sure. The first thing when I think about this is that in order to dialogue, we need information. And there is, at least in Nicaragua, there's very little research on informality. More so in the last few years where economic information has been restricted by governmental institutions. So if we want to start a dialogue, we need to start having proper information. And in that dialogue, the informal leaders are key. They need to say how they feel and what they can and cannot do. Also, the formal sector, the private formal sector, needs to be involved because they're affected by the informality too, and the government, of course. It has to be an open dialogue, and different sectors. Women are more impacted by informality, are more in the formal sector, and I'm sure you won't see them as leaders of the informal sector. So it has to be a very open, a very inclusive dialogue on informality and the effects on economic growth. But it has to start with a lot of research before.
Thank you. All right, research and dialogue. Todor?
I believe it should be a collaboration. It should be a public-private partnership and not led only by the government. Because in many examples of this transition from informality to formality that we've been witnessing over the past 25 years, we've seen cases where the governments actually did deformalization. So we had a sector probably close to 100% on 90% informal, and then at the end, it was say 90% formal, or maybe 100% formal. But one of the huge problems in this transition is that if at the beginning you had a perfect competition, I mean, informal economy, but perfect competition, and at the end, you might have perfectly formal market, but a monopoly. or oligopoly. And then, of course, the society would be better off in the first case, because the prices would be lower, and then even maybe the quality of the service might be lower. So in public-private partnership, where you cooperate with the businesses, with civil society organizations, that would not happen. And I strongly advise those countries that would design plans to move from informality to formality, to pay attention whom they're helping, whether they're helping a few guys get a bigger share of the market by formalizing, or kind of trying to maintain the justice in this market.
Appreciate that. And Slim, it looks like you get the final word.
Yeah, the final work is probably a combination of the both two last proposal from the speakers. Dialogue and information is a key, definitely, and public-private dialogue also. It was already said by Marina. So yes, the dialogue between private, and for me, I think that we should create an independent institution that monitor what is happening in the informal sector. This independent institution doesn't have as a mission to control or to formalize the informality. They have only to monitor informality and help informality not grow, but help informality receive, as we said at the beginning, the right information to understand the benefit of formalization, etc. And probably could be the place where elite or thinkers, people that can be very creative in bringing solution on and working step by step, sector by sector, gradually try to have this sector, what can be done here, what can be done there. It's not one size fits all solution. It's a tailor-made solution by sector. This is my idea that I want to add to what was said previously. Thank you.
Great. You know, this conversation today did what I wanted, which was it went in some directions I wasn't expecting. So I learned some things, and I think there's also some really solid wisdom in here about how to have reasonable approaches to informality. Our listeners, thank you so much for staying with us. There will be a message sent out with some follow-up information, some articles from work, for example, the Center for the Study of Democracy has been working on in Europe. I have a new paper from CIPE out, a brief on this topic. So there will be some follow-up readings. Please check out the FEDN website. And most importantly, wherever you are, join me in thanking our fabulous panelists. Thank you so much, Marina, Todor, and Slim. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
good day.
Bye. Bye.